can buy the plans if you follow the link in the video description. As usual, it will include templates of all parts that will print to A4 paper, as well as this 3D model to help you assemble the finer details.
First off, glue the trigger guard to the frame. No fancy cuts in the trigger guard, but round off this edge before you glue it on. Clamp the side plate in place and make sure it's aligned before drilling the screws. So I've got a drill bit through here, I've got the rotor through here, and I've also got the trigger in place. So I've got 3 points to check if this side plate is correctly aligned. If you're wondering how you get 25.5mm thick wood, it's pretty simple. You just have to saw a piece off a 19mm board and plane that down to 25.5. Then you stick the template on this part. The exact thickness will depend on how wide the frame is. So that measures exactly 25mm. And that's why I made this 25.5. But depending on your materials, it may be slightly different dimensions. To slide forward, position this little block in the right spot. It needs to be able to clear the hammer when the hammer is cocked. You can use either a fine saw or a half round file to cut the slide serrations. I'm using the top of the vise to guide the file. Glue up the one-piece grip, which slots onto the back of the frame like that. And once that's done, you can open up that hole, secure it with a pin or a screw, whatever you want. When you're working on the grip, I suggest filling it with some scrap timber so you don't accidentally crush it. Glue a little block onto the slide catch so your thumb can operate it. Regardless of how you plan to finish it, I suggest a diluted coat of polyurethane varnish over all parts, inside and out. I like to brush that on and then wipe off any excess. Once that wiped coat is dry, you can add further coats of polyurethane to the outside only, or a wax finish, or whatever you please. Just please don't paint it with colours that might get you into trouble. I'm going to show you how the Desert Eagle goes together and how it works. Keep in mind, since building this, I've had to make a lot of changes along the way. So my build will look a bit different to the plans. So the frame is made completely out of 19mm pine, 3mm MDF, and just a little bit more 3mm wood here. Of course, you can substitute the MDF for plywood if you want. Up at the front, we've got a pin to hold a extension spring. We've got 2 holes here for these pins that are press fitted in place. And we've got this spacer here. All that does is just stabilises this pin, because otherwise it'll wobble around. This hole here is slightly bigger so that the rotor can spin freely. And on the other side, this is a slide rail, and it also stops the rotor from moving side to side. This screw here doesn't do anything. This block looks a little bit complicated, but none of these cuts, holes, or this little piece are actually necessary. I'll start putting the moving parts in place, starting with the releaser. This needs a fairly stiff coil spring fitted here, and it needs to be made of something very strong. Plastic would be best, but as you can see, laminated plywood works too. Just make sure it's high quality plywood like marine or birch. That fits in there like so. Once that's fitted, we can put the trigger in place. That's just 18mm pine. Like that. You can see how that works. The hammer is 19mm pine, so virtually the same thickness as the frame, and that gets bolted in place. And the reason it's bolted is so that you can adjust the tension so it's not too loose or too tight. And we've got the rotor, which I've made it out of plastic. You could probably get away with the same plywood as the releaser though. And that also looks a bit different in the plan because I've reinforced it. And just a bunch of washers for the releaser. And then the side plate can go on. Now the positions of the screws have changed. And like I was saying with the hammer, you want that to be not too tight, not too loose. And on that side plate we've got another slide rail here. Side plates can be held with nice short screws. Doesn't have to be longer than 12 millimeters. But so that it doesn't loosen off, I want the slide catch to be held with as long a screw as possible. Again, some things have changed. Instead of 2 screws here, it's now just the 1 screw for the slide catch. Like the hammer, you want just a good amount of tension. The one-piece grip is made from 2 pieces of plywood and a piece of pine in here that is just slightly thicker than this diameter here. That just slides on like so, and you can pin that in place with really just about anything. The slide is all 3mm plywood and pine. There should only be 1 screw hole here. And we have a channel cut for a fairly soft extension spring. You want this spring to be as soft as possible, but if you can't manage that, a small rubber band will do the trick. We also have a cutout for the slide catch in the left panel only. So to assemble the slide, we're going to hook that spring onto that little pin. Make sure that spring is inside the channel. And it just goes on like that. And from here, we can start to see how it works. So pulling the trigger activates the releaser, and the rubber band pushes on that block. Only this far, but with heavy rubber bands, they'll send the slide quite far back. And the slide resets, the trigger resets, and you can fire again. So it pushes it this far, and inertia causes the slide to move all the way back and then reset under spring tension. So it's really very simple. Oh yeah, that screw doesn't do anything. So before I load it up, let's talk about ammo here. I've got size 12, 16, 30, 61 and broccolini bands, which you might be able to see they're about the same as the size 61. So the size 12, a little bit short, just a tiny bit short. But if you were to make this barrel shorter, these I think would work really well. They'd also put very little strain on the mechanism, so you could afford to make the whole thing out of pine plywood. These size 16 bands are a fair bit longer and they stretch much further. Now, for the slide to operate reliably, you would actually need to do the opposite and make the barrel longer. As it is, they do work, but they don't kick the slide back very much. I find size 30 to be the best. It's a good balance of reliable slide operation, power, and strain on the mechanism. As you might guess, size 61, that does put a bit of strain on the mechanism. You can only load 5 of those, but if you made that all out of plastic, you would have no worries. But let's load it up with, well, we're going to try the 12s. Now it's important to load it with the slide open, because otherwise the rotor will not turn back all the way. So they do quite a good job of kicking the slide back. Let's try 16. For this, I'm going to bias load them. That will improve accuracy. It might also help to kick the slide back. You can see that last shot, the slide didn't move very much. And my favourite, the size 30. It's got a nice kick to it. And the Fat Boys, the 61. That's pretty snappy. I suggest adjust the barrel length, maybe even the strength of the slide spring based on what rubber bands you can find. If all you can get at the shop is the size 16s, have as light a spring as possible, a slightly longer barrel, and I think you'll be really happy with this pistol. But if you can get all these oddball rubber bands, why not get a bunch? See which ones you like the most. Now, word of caution, if you're going to use fat rubber bands like this, make sure that mechanism is safe. Put the first few 50 shots or so with your safety glasses on, make sure it's not going to break.